Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Alright folks, so here's a topic that I absolutely have to chime in on. I've been saying it for years that I believe Donald Trump needs to have more of an independent media presence. I think every presidential candidate should. The first person to really put it into effect, I think, is Vivek Ramaswamy. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding. He's been willing to do pretty much any show that's willing to have him on, whether it's left, right, center, mainstream media, independent media. He simply shows up and absolutely knocks it out of the park each and every time. And his poll numbers are rising and rising fast. I think Donald Trump should embrace the independent media, even if he's an old school media guy, especially considering that those are the only platforms that are essentially going to humanize him and treat him fairly. Well, at the top of that list is obviously Joe Rogan's podcast. He's the king. In the world of interviewing, in the world of podcasts, independent media, Joe Rogan is pretty much number one. He's got to get on that show. But the unfortunate situation, it seems what's stopping this from potentially happening isn't Donald Trump's team or the Trump camp, but rather Joe Rogan himself, who continues to hold the stance that he's not interested in having Donald Trump on his show. And I really want to address this topic. I really want to talk about this. Patrick Bet-David was recently on Rogan's podcast, and he made an argument that I think mostly appealed to Joe Rogan's ego. I don't think that's the strongest argument as to why he should have Trump on his show, so let me put my argument out there. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so firstly, let's start off with the interaction. Here's a little snippet of Patrick Bet-David trying to convince Joe Rogan to have Trump on the show, and Rogan's response.
I'm really looking forward to seeing you and Trump together.
You keep pushing that.
I think, okay, I'll tell you from my perspective, on why you ought to consider it. He's a guy that's probably the most misunderstood by a side, and a guy that...
How do you think he's misunderstood? In what way?
I think the media has really painted this guy to be evil. I like to talk to people I fully disagree with, and I think they're delusional in certain areas to understand, what makes you believe what you just said.
Right.
So to me, I think the guy that's going to interview him in a way that nobody else is going to interview him, you, to look back, there's going to be no mainstream media 20 years from now. You know that, I know that. To look back and say Joe never interviewed Trump, that's kind of weird. So that's my pitch to you.
Good, I like weird.
You like weird?
I like things that are weird.
I don't know about that.
Why don't you interview him?
Why don't I interview him? I think if he's him, okay, you're here, Joe. Everybody else is below you. In this space, not mainstream. In mainstream, he'll do Tucker. He'll do, Megyn Kelly, whatever. I don't know if he's done Megyn Kelly. He hasn't done it, but he'll do Tucker. He'll do Brett Baer. He'll do Hannity. He'll do all that stuff. But in this lane we're in, you have to do you first. Then comes everybody else. He can't do that. So I think we come after you come. If I'm his advisor, I would advise him, you can't go to anybody else unless you go to Joe first. And I'm telling you, from a perspective of if I'm his counsel, I would say you go to Joe, then you go XYZ. Everybody else is XYZ Joe. You're Joe. Everyone else is XYZ. Okay?
So I tried to edit it as best as I could, provide the full context without it being too long. Essentially, Patrick Bet-David took the angle that, Joe, listen, you're the guy. What's your legacy going to be like if you don't have Trump on your show? When we look back at the great ascension of independent media, people are going to think about Joe Rogan and say, well, he never had Trump on his show. Why was that? This is clearly an appeal to Rogan's ego. I don't think it's the right angle at all. I mean, Joe Rogan's really just not that kind of guy. If you watch his podcast, I watch it very often. I wouldn't say religiously, but I'm a huge fan of the show. He's just not in it for the ego or the media legacy. The strategy probably works great if you're trying to sell cars. Listen, man, you're so successful. What are people going to say if you're driving down the road and driving a Honda Civic? Your legacy of excellence, man. You need to be in this Porsche. In my opinion, the reason why Rogan should have Trump on the show has nothing to do with Joe Rogan or his legacy. It has to do, honestly, with doing the right thing. Donald Trump is the most unjustly, politically persecuted man in America. I don't think there's any question question of that. I mean, look, some people think that all of these indictments are fair. I obviously don't. That's my stance. But regardless, whether you think it's unjust political persecution or just, prosecution, the fact is it's pretty much the biggest story in America. A former president of the United States is facing prosecution from all angles, and the crappy part of the situation is that the entire legacy media apparatus in this environment isn't giving Donald Trump a fair shot. Nobody is giving Donald Trump a voice. They're mostly giving Trump detractors a voice and claiming that his defense is, well, just conspiracy theories. They're piling on. You have Donald Trump standing in the street, there's a raised grand piano above him attached by a cord, and the legacy media is filing away at that rope, hoping that the piano lands on Donald Trump. Maybe not the greatest metaphor, but you get the point. There has to be a counterbalancing force. There's no balance in the media at the moment. Legacy media is all powerful. Independent media, of course, has its little world, and it's growing every single day, but in the world of news, in the world of broadcasting, legacy media is still the titan. And if they're going to act so corruptly, which Joe Rogan even admitted when referencing Russiagate, for instance, if they're going to be doing everything in their power to destroy him and to not give him a platform, then people who represent independent media and fight for values of open discussion, freedom of speech, and fair, unbiased sources of information, well, those people, in my opinion, have a duty to do the right thing and provide that voice to people who are being crushed by the media apparatus. And if you think about it, that's pretty much what Joe Rogan does. That's where his relationship with Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson come from. People who are being destroyed by all of these phony narratives, and Rogan gave them a voice. He has that platform that can humanize people. Here's the real person, and not what the media is presenting you. Patrick Bet-David said at one point that Donald Trump is the most misunderstood man in America, and I think that's absolutely true. Obviously, that's the media's main goal, to make Donald Trump seem as if he's the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler. Well, obviously that isn't fair. They create these narratives, they constantly attack and slander him, and when it's Trump's turn to counter the narrative, when it's his turn to defend himself, it's the Rachel Maddow approach, huh?
So far, he's just giving his normal list of grievances. We don't consider that necessarily newsworthy, and there's a cost to us as a news organization of knowingly broadcasting untrue things. So our deal with you is that we will monitor these remarks. If he does say anything newsworthy, we will turn them around and report on that right away. But for now, just know that it's happening and we're not taking it.
They cut off the feed. They don't broadcast his rallies. Rather, they tell you, don't listen to that man. Listen to us telling you that what that man is saying is disinformation. You can't make opinions yourselves. Let us make the opinion for you. This is the acceptable opinion. That right there is where Joe Rogan comes in. And I believe that in his refusal to have Donald Trump on, he is failing in his most important role in this independent media space. The whole world wants to see presidential candidates as humans, in a real, authentic, open space of discussion and interaction. The world needs that. We need less of the fake news, tit for tat, slanderous bias, hit piece politics, and more open dialogue. And obviously the best place to start would be with Donald Trump. Break through all the craziness, all the narratives, and literally just speak with the man. What does the world have to lose? I mean, what could possibly be the harm in that? I don't get the thinking. I don't know. Obviously Joe Rogan has his own opinion, and he's totally entitled to whatever stance he wants. It's his show, his platform. He's the guy, he's the boss, absolutely. But personally, I don't get it. I don't agree with it. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's something I'm misunderstanding. This is where I stand. I figured you guys would be interested. Simply just putting it out there in the universe. And of course, I'm curious to see what other people have to say. You guys in the comments, and hopefully some other voices in the space. I'm just curious where people stand on this issue. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel if you guys feel like joining us here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.